Wonder Workshop presents On Writing Fight Scenes. So after doing all the research for this video, I've come to realize that fight scenes are more complicated than they seem! In this video, we're going to be talking about fight scenes. The 4 parts of a fight scene: sentence structure, character growth in battles, using the 5 senses, and big battle versus small battle. For this video, I'm going to be using Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson and Eragon by Christopher Paolini as references. Now, let's dive into this On Writing Fight Scenes video. Part 1. Beginning, Escalation, Climax, and Resolution. Let's break a fight scene down into 4 parts: beginning, escalation, climax, and resolution. These can be applied to both long and short battles and used in smaller form more than once throughout. We'll talk more about the smaller sentence level structure of a fight in a bit, but to begin, we'll start with the overall structure of the scene itself. The beginning of the battle is often slower paced. The tensions haven't risen to their full height, but they're climbing. Take this scene from Christopher Paolini's Eragon. They dashed against the rows of stakes, covering them with slick blood and limp corpses as the ranks of the vanguard were crushed against the posts. A cloud of black arrows flew over the barrier at the crouched defenders. Eragon ducked behind his shield, and Saphira covered her head. Arrows rattled harmlessly against her armor. This is a paragraph from the very beginning of the battle. It has already been determined to the reader in previous chapters the stakes of this battle, but the stakes aren't very high yet. Eragon and Saphira are able to deflect the first attacks with ease. The beginning is often ended with a swift entry into the escalation, as we can see from the paragraph on the opposite page. Saphira bellowed and leapt toward the fight, diving into a whirlwind of noise and blurred action. With her jaws and talons, Saphira tore through an Urgle. Her teeth were as lethal as any sword, her tail a giant mace. From behind her back, Eragon parried a hammer blow from an Urgle chief, protecting her vulnerable wings. Zarok's crimson blade seemed to gleam with delight as blood spurted along its length. This paragraph is remarkably faster paced than the previous one. I would say it still represents the beginning, but the action is rising. The fight goes on for roughly 10 pages, though the last 4 are a confrontation with the Shade, Durza. The beginning continues on for about another paragraph before shifting into an escalation when Saphira and Eragon are separated, and Eragon is surrounded. One thing I've noticed is that within these 4 parts are mini escalations and resolutions. What I mean is that, while yes, the tensions escalate when Eragon and Saphira are separated and Eragon is in trouble, this mini conflict is resolved when he is saved by Murtagh. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. Fight scenes rise and fall, but slowly escalate in the background. And because fight scenes are more complicated than they seem, we need a graph, which is on the screen now. This graph demonstrates the battle we're analyzing here. The blue marks the rise and falling action, while the red marks the slow and steady rising tensions. The first high point is when Saphira and Eragon are separated, raising the tensions. Every time the action falls, its fall is shorter than before, hence the slowly climbing red line. Tensions reach their highest point when Eragon is confronted by Durza. This is the climax. The resolution is how the battle is resolved. In this case, when Eragon is saved by Saphira, though that rescue has large costs. Part 2. The micro of a fight scene. We've looked at the scene structure of a fight. Now let's go down to the micro of a fight scene. Often advice is given about fight scenes is to write shorter sentences. But one thing I've noticed is that most good fight scenes don't actually have shorter sentences. So what makes them different? Take this sentence from Brandon Sanderson's Mistborn. Shan swung her daggers, and Vin twisted to the side, dodging one slice and blocking the other with her forearm, earning a deep gash. A lot is conveyed in just one sentence, which makes me question the idea of writing in shorter sentences. This sentence uses a lot of good describing words, such as swung, twisted, and blocking. Ordinary sentences have a lot less verb beats than fight scenes do, showing that it is less about sentence length and more about the action beats. The sentence would be a lot less interesting if it went something like this. Shan moved her daggers in an interesting motion. Vin twisted out of the way. Vin then dodged one swing from Shan and then got a cut on her forearm. Not only is this not as interesting as the original sentence, but it feels slower. Plus, the same things have been conveyed in 3 sentences instead of 1. So why is it not as fast-paced? Like I said before, fight scene sentences often have a lot more action beats in them. By splitting the sentence into 3 and taking away some of the action beats, we lose the fast pace. It doesn't have the same feeling as the original sentence did, which shows that you don't necessarily need shorter sentences to make the fight scene faster paced.
But Caden, that can't be the only thing that makes fight scenes faster paced.
Right you are, Harry Potter Funko Pop thingy. A lot of fight scenes have a sense of a react, pause, act. You can almost compare this to Isaac Newton's third law of motion. For every action, there must be an equal and opposite reaction. What I'm saying here is that to make a fight scene interesting and faster paced, putting action on top of action on top of action might not gain the results you're looking for. Instead, perhaps try using the react, pause, act mini structure. Like so. Shan swung her daggers, action, and Vin twisted to the side, reaction. Dodging one slice, pause, and blocking, action, the other with her forearm, earning a deep gash. This is how the react, pause, act structure could work in this particular sentence. The react, pause, act structure doesn't have to be just used for sentences. You can use it for paragraphs or your entire fight if you'd like. But it does convey a realistic battle. For every action, there's a reaction. The reaction doesn't necessarily have to be the protagonist retaliating to a sword swipe from their opponent. It could be the reaction to their own actions. In other words, the consequence of their actions is the reaction. Part 3. Character growth in fight scenes. It might sound weird at first. Like, really, Caden? Character growth in a fight scene? But trust me on this. When writing a fight scene, these questions are good to ask yourself. Why does the character make the choices they do? How does it impact them externally and internally? Are they getting farther or closer to their goals? What are the stakes of this battle? And are your characters skilled or bad at fighting? This might affect how they act in certain situations. This may seem like a lot, but they're actually connected. Number 1 leads into question 2, while questions 3, 4, and 5 are linked, because 1, the stakes of the battle affect what their goals are, and 2, their skill at fighting might shape how the battle fares for them. Let's focus on the first 2 points. Why does the character make the choices they do, and how does that affect them internally and externally? First of all, character motivation is a whole different topic, so I'm going to narrow it down to the smaller choices in battle. Often characters with less battle experience will question what they do a lot more than more experienced warriors. A lot of stories show characters struggling with the fact that they will have to kill people in battle. They wonder whether if what they are doing is truly right. This is a place for great character growth. Roran from Aragon is forced to kill to save his family. He has turmoil within himself about those he has killed to get his village to safety. This is a great point in his growth as a character. He has to face it that to keep those he loves safe, he'll have to do something he sees as wrong. That is how a battle can affect a character internally. But what about externally? Fights aren't realistic without costs. Say your character makes it out alive but is injured or scarred in some way, reminding them of what happened. S.D. Smith does this really well in the Green Ember series, specifically the last book, which is Ember's End. Pickett is able to help Smalls defeat Morbin, but the cost is that Pickett is left crippled without an arm. Now for points 3, 4, and 5. Are they getting farther or closer to their goal? This all depends on the fight, and what their goals are can depend on the stakes of the battle. In J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, a book obviously no one's heard of, Frodo and Sam's goals are to throw the ring into the crack of doom. As for how close they are to their goal, it shifts as the story goes on. But in the final battle, if you could call it that, the tensions rise to their fullest and their goal is moved a little farther ahead. Remember that a character's goal can change throughout the fight scene. It could be slipping away, raising tensions. Question 5 is a pretty easy answer. Are they good at fighting or not? That is for you as the author to decide. Say your character isn't very good at fighting, but if your book has multiple fight scenes in it, show them growing and learning from their mistakes. It isn't as satisfying for the reader if the character is bad at fighting, yet suddenly during the battle, they fight like a pro. Unless there's a reason for this, like in Gregor the Overlander, Gregor being a rager. Read the book to find out how that all works. The readers won't like it and it won't satisfy them. So basically have your character grow and learn as the battles progress. Part 4. The 5 Senses. Using the 5 senses in a fight can be really cool, and it can immerse the reader in the battle so much more. Let's go through the different senses and how they can be used in a scene like this. Sight. Though the most obvious one, sight can still be rather versatile. For example, your character could be fighting in the sand. Their opponent might kick dust in their face, temporarily blinding them. You can change what their vision is like for a brief point, making it feel rather realistic. 2. Touch. Touch can be useful. Describing how the sword felt in their hand or something like that can add to the realism. It can also really deepen your sense of how the character's feeling. 3. Smell. Smell is fun to play with. What would the battle smell like? This might change depending on where the battle is taking place and other factors. Say it is happening in an old house. It might smell musty. 4. Sound. Sound is cool to use. How the character hears the battle can deepen the reader's experience. Say the battle was happening in the rain. The character could hear the rain thundering overhead while they grappled in the ground with their opponent. You can also play with using onomatopoeias. Taste. Taste by far may sound the weirdest to use in a fight. But what if you did use it? The character might taste blood in their mouth or something like that. The 5 senses are a good thing to use in any scene, really. Why not try applying them to one of your fight scenes? What do you think? Part 5. Big battle and small battle. The way fight scenes can vary can depend on how big the battle is. The way a fight is built might be different if you're writing a duel or one-on-one combat versus 2 armies colliding. Let's examine 2 different battles. One is a one-on-one duel and the other is a massive epic battle. Let's start with the first one. Big battle. Excerpt from Eldest. The rider grasped his sword in both hands and swung it over his head toward Aragorn, who lifted Zarok to defend himself. Their blades collided with a burst of crimson sparks. Then Aragorn shoved his opponent and started a complex series of blows. He stabbed and parried, dancing on light feet as he forced the steel-clad rider to the edge of the plateau. When they reached the edge, the rider held his ground, fending off Aragorn's attacks, no matter how clever. It's as if he can anticipate my every move, thought Aragorn, frustrated. In a 2-person fight, the main character is much more focused on the one other person they're fighting, obviously. We also get more detail. Whereas in a fight with lots of people involved, the author doesn't want to give tons of detail for every single encounter the protagonist has. These smaller ones, we have more time to show every little bit or a lot more detail in the scene. Let's look at a bigger battle now. Referencing Inheritance, which is the 4th Aragorn book. Howling, Roran fell upon the first row of men. Blood sprayed around him as he swung his hammer and felt metal and bone give way. The soldiers were so tightly packed that they were nearly helpless. He killed 4 of them before one even managed to swing his sword at him, which he blocked with his shield. In this paragraph, we don't spend too much time with each opponent. We don't even experience the moments when he kills 4 soldiers. It is just written in summary. Since it's a bigger battle, there is no time to focus on every enemy Roran faces. Let's review what we talked about today. In part 1, we talked about the overall structure of a fight scene, breaking it up into 4 parts: beginning, escalation, climax, and resolution. Then, in part 2, we talked about the sentence structure of a battle, and how it's not as much about sentence length as it is about action beats. We also looked at the react, pause, act mini-structure. In part 3, characters, we talked about how characters are affected internally and externally, and how their goals can shift throughout the fight. In part 4, we talked about using the 5 senses for description in fight scenes. And in part 5, we discussed the differences between epic battles between armies and one-on-one duels. Thank you for watching this video on writing fight scenes. If you'd like to see more of this content, subscribe and keep an eye out for a new video next week. If you have any suggestions for on-writing videos or just videos in general, pop them in the discussion page of my channel. Links down below. I hope you enjoyed this video. Never stop reading.